But you're here. That's what counts.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the Global Day of Jewish Learning here at Bonei Shalom. I'm doing a quick sound check to make sure that everybody who's joining us on live stream can hear as well. Thank you all so much for joining us on the live stream. Thank you all for everyone who's joining us in person. We've got 15 people here, 12, something like that, and we can accommodate many more. So if you're thinking about coming down, it's 70 degrees outside. It's a warm, beautiful day. And can you hear me? Okay, all right. So we have a wonderful program today. Starting off, leading the way, as usual, we are so fortunate to have Morah, Yehudis Fishman, who will be introducing, we'll be doing the first full session this year from 1 to 2 o'clock. I know it's 1:05. Thank you all for giving us this few extra minutes. Then we have Rabbi Jack Gabriel coming up at 2 o'clock. And then Ed Cass at 3 o'clock for a hour on prayer or alternate prayer. And then I'll finish us up at 4 o'clock, final hour, talking about the Hebrew alphabet, the ancient Hebrew alphabet. Of course, today is November 5th. In just a couple days, it'll be November 7th, a month after the horrible atrocities in Israel. And everybody is thinking about that right now, and everybody's dealing with that in their own individual ways. We're here as the Adult Learning Committee. I chair that committee with Peter Ornstein. We're here to further adult learning of Torah, Jewish learning, coming together as a congregation in something outside of prayer, in learning and strengthening our community this way, right? And at this very difficult time, this is one of the best things that we can do as Am Yisrael. So thank you all again so much for being with us on this day at this very difficult time. It's a beautiful day. Again, for those listening on live stream, it's a beautiful day outside. Come on down and be with us, even if it's just for an hour. We're doing 4 sessions again. Quick intro. Morah Yehudis coming up right now at 1 o'clock for an hour, followed by Rabbi Jack Gabriel at 2 p.m., Ed Cass at 3 p.m., myself at 4 p.m. And we have food for those of you who are here. We have food. We have light refreshments. We have dessert. It was Halloween, so we got some candy too. We had to get in on that. So we've got I got the post Halloween discounts, right? Okay, so we have both gluten-free and non-gluten-free. We even have some Havenly bakery bread that was left over from this morning. We just had another Sunday Hebrew school today, and so they gave us some of the leftover food. We have drinks, we have water, we have iced tea, we have seltzer, etc. So thank you again so much. I'm very excited to introduce Morah Yehudis Fishman. And Morah Yehudis do you want to sit here or stand? Each person's going to choose whether they prefer. And you can...
Yeah, I think I need to sit right now, but if you can pass out the...
I'll pass out the books, yep.
Don't worry, we're not going to do a full service.
Morah, did you want a music stand to put your notes on?
It's just my security paper. I probably don't use it too much. Yeah.
Can I bring a chair to put yourself on?
Yeah. A little bit helpful. So how does the live stream work here? I don't...
It's going to pick up your voice right above you.
Yeah, but there's no... it's on a screen?
It's not on the screen.
Oh, okay.
And I have it here. Do you want it close? Do you want to look at it? I have it coming
Just
through here.
tell me, if people are there, just so I know I'm not talking to...
Yeah. Do you want to move closer?
Yeah, why don't you come in? Go a little closer.
Yeah, you want this?
Can you hear me?
Yehudis, you want us to move our chairs closer to you?
Well,
No, I
no,
think
just,
Yehudis, could you move your
Gideon.
chair closer to us?
If it's easier, yeah, come here.
Oh, that's
She has to be underneath the,
yeah, sure, why don't you move?
And-
Just for Shula and Gideon.
If you want.
Okay. Yeah, so, hi everybody. As Daniel mentioned, today is a very strange day. I haven't changed my clocks yet in my house except on the computer. It happens out of we thank God. Otherwise, I would be coming a little different time. I'm going to talk a little bit about time, but also, as Daniel mentioned, it's basically a month since October 7th, and I want to dedicate our learning especially to the healing of the people who, everybody, all the Jewish people, you know, either they're alive or not, but whatever it is, well, I would say the people who are not alive are less traumatized than the people who are alive, put it that way. I really believe that. I believe that, and this is part of Jewish tradition, that the souls of people who have been taken away because they're Jewish, they go to the highest place in the Garden of Eden. You know, there's even a practical law that they're not buried in burial shrouds. They're buried the way that they were, the way that they were killed, because the idea is we want to have like a protest in heaven of saying saying to God, well, like, what's going on? Why is this happening? And that happened during the Holocaust too, when they found bodies of people. They buried them just the way they were, again, to have a kind of heavenly protest to the angels and to God, of course, to say that enough already, Dayenu. So my topic for today is based on one of the global Jewish Day of Learning's topic. It's called, and there's going to be a paradox, kind of a contradiction. I'll ask you about how you think it's a contradiction, but the topic is cultivating a habit of generosity. Well, let me ask you right now, because I only thought of the contradiction after a while, but why does that seem like a contradiction to you or a paradox? I'll give you a hint. I'll say it again with emphasis on the words that I feel are a contradiction. Cultivating a habit of generosity. What's the contradiction?
It should be a habit, it should just be part of us.
Right. Miriam?
We'd like our kindness to be conscious, not out of habit.
That's right. It should be spontaneous. It should be with feeling. And a habit implies that something you kind of do automatically or without much thought or feeling. Right? So I'll hopefully address that a little bit. But first I want to start by asking you, what do you think is the most important Jewish prayer? Jude? Very good. That's exactly the answer that I was hoping for, and without any prompting from your grandfather. That's great. So why do you think it's the most important Jewish prayer? What
Because it talks about how God is one.
Let's change these here. Okay.
That's absolutely correct.
You got absolutely correct.
1,000 pages.
And that's how, hint, hint, I'm going to help you resolve many paradoxes that I'm setting up here from this chapter of the Talmud that we're going to read a little bit from. But let me first tell you a personal story with Shema, and it has to do with Israel, actually. So years ago when I was in Santa Fe, I taught a young boy, I think he must have been around 8 or 9 years old, and very rambunctious student, but at the end of the year, I was worn out from teaching him. But he made me this little magnet that said, "You're the best teacher." Or you who's the best teacher. And I kept that magnet. I had it in my refrigerator for a while. Years later, maybe 20 years later, I read this story in, I don't know, Facebook or the newspaper about a soldier in Israel who was on a tank, and all of a sudden the soldier said, "We didn't expect anything, but I felt like it was going to be very dangerous. And I put my head down and I said Shema that my teacher taught me. And as I put my head down, a bomb was over and blew up the tank. And that was the boy. Ironically, his name was Jordan, but I don't remember his Hebrew name. But that's one of my personal stories about Shema. Also, there are many stories about rabbis after the Holocaust. They went to various orphanages where Jewish children were kept, but they didn't know who was Jewish and who was not. So they might ask the kids. The kids might not even know, and the people who run the orphanages, mostly they were Catholics, and they might not want to say who the Jewish kids were. So two stories, kind of similar stories with a similar outcome. One was a Rabbi Tauber, a famous rabbi in Muncie, who wrote several books about Judaism, and he started to say Shema, and he went very slow, and he said Shema Yisrael, and he paused, and whoever continued saying the Shema, he knew that they were Jewish, and he pulled them out, and he said, "These are our kids. We got to take them back to find their family." So that was one, and the other was that another rabbi in a similar situation started saying Shema, and he said Shema Israel, and he didn't look. I mean, he looked around. He didn't cover his eyes, but all the kids who covered their eyes, also he knew that they were Jewish. So that's like so powerful, that sense of oneness that you was talking about. That's a part of the soul. It doesn't come after. It's born with a Jewish child. So, but the sense of generosity is not necessarily manifest, because children, nature and nurture, people are raised in different ways, and they're not necessarily connected to being generous. Even though, what's the Hebrew word for generosity that you might think of?
Hoda'ah. Hoda'ah.
Well, hoda'ah is more like gratitude. Thanks. When you say moda, toda, and that's definitely connected to being generous. What's another word that you might think of? Tzedakah, right? Tzedakah, charity.
Chesed.
And chesed, yeah, chesed. Chesed is usually connected with generosity, and there's an expression in the Torah itself that has a word that's called, I think Jack kind of mentioned it, nediv lev. Nediv lev means nediv, like nedava, generous of heart, nediv lev, and it's actually coming up in Jews' bar mitzvah parsha, talks about the contributions to the tabernacle, and the expression that's used is kol nediv lev. Whoever was generous of heart, they would give their contributions to building the sanctuary and later the temple. But at the same time, here's another contradiction. You have like specific details of who should give what, and specific parts of the tabernacle that need to be presented and built in a very special way. So why, if the directions are so specific, why do you need nediv lev? Why do you need a person of generous heart? What does that add to the contributions? In fact, to make that question even stronger, everybody brought different contributions, and there were certain materials that were brought that were used for different parts of the tabernacle, like gold and wood, and some of the more holy vessels were also made out of gold and wood, and some of the not so holy parts also had that. So the rabbis say that the Moshe, who was the main organizer of the donations, and Bezalel, actually, very interesting. Moshe had a helper named Bezalel, and Bezalel, like the Bezalel Institute in Israel for artistry, And Bezalel actually could. The Torah doesn't say how old he was, but Bezalel happened to be how old? He was a bar mitzvah boy, either
was
12 or
13.
13, something like that,
Wow.
around that age. And why was he called Bezalel? Because his name was Betzel Kel, in the shadow or the shade of God. So, in a way, he had more insight in certain levels than Moshe also had. If you want more details, maybe you can come to Jews Bar Mitzvah, and he might talk about that too. Roberta, do you want to say?
Oh yeah, just what you're saying reminds me of that song, "We will build this world from love."
Mm-hmm.
And so it's when you build something from love, it's something maybe it's somehow different from just building it through habit.
Yeah, although that's a mistranslation an out of context mistranslation of that part. It's a nice song, but it's not what the words mean in that place in the Bible, in that song.
Well, it's actually in Psalm 89, and the words are Olam Chesed Yibaneh.
Yeah, but it's not by itself. It's
Part of-
it's in a
Context.
sentence it's in a context and so on. And this is a nice this is a nice sentiment, but using those words, but that's not what the words mean in the song.
What would you add, Gideon? What's missing?
I have to look at it again because there's the meaning and then there's all the stuff that resonates with it. But olam,
Just to
for
make the-
example,
yeah,
means forever, not a world, not the world.
Well, it can mean both, but
No, but
in that
song,
context, right?
yes.
Yeah.
But getting back to
Yes.
what you said, Yehudis,
Yeah.
I think the generosity, right,
Mm-hmm.
leaves a space then that, it's by virtue of giving, right, that you have the space to be able to be filled as well,
Nice.
right? And so I think what God is saying to us with a generous heart, leave the openness in your heart, right, to be able to have that true reciprocity. So the more that we can be generous, the more maybe the divine God, or call it what you will.
Yeah, that's a beautiful kind of resonance. Yeah, in fact, I'll further that point that the Ishbitzer Rebbe, one of the famous Hasidic Rebbes, so he said that if you think about it, even though we give something, we do it with our own choice. Who created the materials? Who created the hand that's giving? All we can really give is
It's our appreciation.
our nedivut lev, the generosity of our heart. And if that's not there, it's like God could say, well, I could have put everything there on my own. I didn't need you to do it, because we were talking yesterday. I was at the Shiners for Shabbos, so we were talking about the verse. Where does my help come? I lift up my hands, and maybe Jack will talk about that later. I'll play something. Where does my help come from? Ezri Meim Hashem, my help comes from God. Osei Shamayim va'aretz, the maker of heaven and earth. So why do we have to add that part? We could just say the help comes from God. But if we think about it, if God is the maker of heaven and earth, then everything that we do, in a sense, God is involved. God is doing it for us, with us, again, except because we have a verse in the Torah that says, what does God ask from you but to fear him and have awe with him, for him? And if God is asking, that means he's not,
Can't bestow it.
he's not doing it. He's like Wayne is saying, he's leaving the space for us to fill in with our heart.
I think that's what Roberta was saying.
Yeah.
In a true sense. You
Right.
can't force a person to love you.
Right. So again, where does the idea of habit come from then? Why do we talk about a habit of generosity? So this is a very, very big Jewish point. The point is that a lot of classic texts talk about this. Counterintuitive a little bit, especially to modern thinking, but the saying is, well, I'll give you an example and you'll figure out the saying from it. Maimonides says, if you have a chance to give, let's say, $100 at one time to somebody who needs it, or 100 single dollars 100 times, it adds up to the same thing. It's 100 either way to charity. Rather give, what's the answer?
Give it $1 at a time.
$1 at a time. Why?
Because the cumulative effect, it would become habitual at that point.
Right, that's right. So the saying
Wow.
is, Adam nifal al yedei pu'ulatov. A person is affected by their actions. In other words, if you develop a habit of generosity, the feeling of generosity becomes implanted in you. Now you can't just stop at, if you feel yourself doing something just habitually, you have to go deeper within yourself and feel that sense of generosity over again. Because the first time you do something, you're usually very excited about it, but if you repeat it, even if it's a good act, you might tend to do it mechanically. So you have to keep that plant growing, keep watering it with the generosity over and over again. Miriam, do you want to say something?
I wanted to offer a slightly different tangent look. In cooking, in preparing food, especially like restaurant food, but particularly family also, if it's made with love, we're talking about an energy field.
Right.
And in creating the Mishkan, we're talking about what do we want and hold sacred. And so if you prepare food in anger, it has a different impact on the being than if you prepare from love. And if you bring your treasures to the sanctuary instead of your smatas, that also creates an energy field of sacredness.
Beautiful. Yeah, thanks. That's so important because there are many, many Hasidic stories that talk about people who brought things to the rabbis, to the holy people, and they could tell by there's an official term like psychometry or something. You touch something, and you can feel the energy of it. So, like somebody came. One story, a rabbi came to a house, a hotel, and the owner prepared, gave him the best room. This is kind of like, Janie, like the clock story a little bit. But he prepared the best room for him, and he gave him a bed that was just made for him. And he was up all night, he couldn't sleep. And the host said, what's going on? I gave you literally the best room in the house, the best bed in the house. I could feel the man who made that bed, he was in a bad mood. and that mood kind of affected my sleep. So people are very super sensitive. And we know, ordinary people like us are sensitive sometimes. If somebody will say one thing one time, the same words at another time, you'll feel the difference in the spirit that comes with the words. So even words, even the best words can come from just a kind of, a haphazard place or a place of not feeling, and they won't have an effect on a person so much as when they come from real kindness. So, talking about kindness, so page 5, the Talmud says, these are the things in the last paragraph. They're a passage from the Gemara, which means the Talmud, from Shabbat 1:27. These are the deeds that yield immediate fruit and continue to yield fruit in time to come. So the word literally there is perotehem. Perot is fruit, but it doesn't mean literal fruit, although it could. But it means consequences, results in this world and in the world to come. In other words, actions that a person can do in this world that have positive effect, not just for the moment, but maybe through the whole world and ultimately in the world to come. Now, why would a person's actions have an effect in the world to come? What does that mean, really? Because a person can't do commandments in the world to come. So what does it mean that they eat the fruit? The fruit continue in the world to come. Jack? Do you want?
Well, there's a lot of ways to interpret world to come, but it just means that there's karma. That what you do now will affect what happens next.
Okay. But that's really in this world,
Yes,
right?
right.
So the world to come has to mean another place.
A great Hasidic master, not Nachman Schneerson, but his father-in-law, was once asked if he believed in reincarnation. And he said, sure I do, but do you have to wait for another lifetime to do it?
Right.
So the word to come is the next moment, the
Right.
next moment, the next moment, the next moment.
And also there's a deep Hasidic idea that we're really being renewed every second, because the world is like a balloon that God is blowing energy into. And I asked you, like I told you, that there's one, if a person, I once asked the class, tell me one word that God would have to do to make the world disappear. So, do you remember the word?
You wouldn't have to say anything.
Okay, close. So he's saying that God wouldn't have to say anything, but so the answer would really be nothing. If God did nothing, then the camera, the screen would turn off. So if at each moment we're just kind of doing the same thing that we did the moment before, then again that would go more to a habit than to a spirit of generosity. But there is a world to come where the soul goes, and it's one of the 13 principles of faith, and hopefully at some point I'm going to give a class on reincarnation that people have been asking me. But there also is there's a world to come in a physical sense, and there's a world to come in a spiritual sense. So both the effects of good deeds have an effect, ongoing consequence, like Jack said, karmic effect, both in this world and the world to come. And people who like try to get away with, and again, thinking about these times, people who literally try to get away with murder, they can't get away with it. There's a situation where they're going to be paid for in a very negative way. And the same thing, people who might be killed for doing something good, there's a place where that compensation is much greater than if they just did it and they didn't have the term that's used in Hebrew, mesirat nefesh, to give over their life. So there are these sense of consequences. But the Talmud here lists very specific things. So I'm just going to give it a few examples from here, because it's already a little bit late. But I'll give you a sense of how there seems to be a paradox, but the Torah has a perspective that encompasses everything. So first we have, what's the first one that's mentioned? Kibud of aim, honoring parents. So, the Torah never says you have to love parents. And this goes back to that principle of the one who does good deeds has more feeling than the one who's receiving the good deeds. So, and that's why usually parents love their children a little bit more than the children love their parents. The children should feel gratitude and appreciation and respect, but they're not commanded, not forced to love, because unfortunately we know situations where the parents might not be so perfect, might not be so good, and I don't know of anybody who said their parents were perfect. Yeah, but so there's something very interesting. If you think about the 10 commandments, we know there's 5 on one side, on one stone, and 5 on the other. And generally the commandments on one side are those between a person and God, and on the second side between people and others. So a big question that's asked, why is the 5th commandment on the side between people and God? So what would you say? Why is kabedes avicha ve'esimach, honor your father and mother? Why is that on the side of connected more with God? Good question, right? Good question.
Well, there's a hand of God happening in conception that creates the child that you parent.
Okay, then that's what the Talmud says. There are three partners in every child: the father and the mother and God. And also, many answers given. Like one is that if you learn to honor your physical parents that can be seen, then you can honor the invisible parent, that's God. And so your parents are kind of a transition between God and other people. I remember when I was a little kid, my father was deaf. He couldn't talk. He died when I was 10 years old. But until I was around maybe 8 or something, I thought my father was perfect. Maybe because he couldn't talk. But one time he took me to a bus station. I was supposed to go to day camp. This was in Boston, where at times where little kids could go in the street and be safe. So he's supposed to put me on a bus to go to day camp. And one time, there were buses like lined up in the station. He took me to the wrong bus, and I didn't know. I got in the bus, but I see. I was, aware enough to know that this route does not look familiar. So I go over to the bus driver, and he gives me a piece of paper, and it says, "Wait over there. Get off the bus. Wait over there. Another bus will come along." So I get on the new bus, and I ran over to the driver and I said, "I have a paper for lost kids." For kids who get lost on the bus. And he smiled and he sat me down. But my personal epiphany was to realize that my father was not perfect. He took me to the wrong stop. And that was more like painful than getting on the wrong bus and losing everything. So, but I want to connect this with the idea of generosity. What's the opposite commandment on the other side? Between commandments between God and man and people and people. What's the fifth commandment that goes with the what's the 10th commandment that goes with, like, parallels the fifth? In other words, what's the last commandment, basically?
Don't want what's not yours.
Don't
covet.
Don't covet.
Don't hunger for what's not yours.
Right. So, what could be the connection between the two? Because the rabbis make connections crosswise, not just down, horizontal, not just vertical. So one of the connections is, we grow up and say, if only I had different parents, or if only my parents were different. And the message is, don't covet, because God gave you exactly the parents that you need, to grow up and to become a mensch.
So is there an overlap between don't covet and don't fetch? Are they pretty congruent?
Yeah, absolutely. But don't. Again, I always go back with that to the serenity prayer. Know the difference between things that you can control and things that you can't control, and the things that you control, take action, and the things that you can't control, don't fetch. Try to figure out why those things are happening to you. Like when you get lost on the road, don't fetch. Maybe you avoided an accident. Maybe you're going to meet somebody who otherwise wouldn't meet. Try to figure out kind of. Yes, please.
I was reading this morning the differences between Abraham's faith and Moses' faith, right? And I think there's a parallel here to be drawn, in the sense that when you say we should give it with generosity, with all of our heart, I think there's a direct connection to God at that point. Whereas Moses' faith, there was no Judaism when Abraham came, right? He just had the faith that was so primordial within him, right? That he didn't need the Torah, right? He didn't need I'm saying Abraham at this point. You know, they say that Moses was a different type of faith.
Also, different time and a different situation, different
Yeah,
circumstance.
and I
Right,
recognize
yeah.
it's all contextual
Right.
or so. But I think when we give with all of our heart, I think that even transcends Judaism.
Well, I would say, I would just correct you a little bit, and I would say that Abraham was tuned into a higher Torah, the source of where the Torah came from in the first place.
Okay.
Because
that's
remember
fair.
the idea that the Torah is
I
the
don't have
blueprint.
a different Torah,
Yeah.
if you will, a
Yeah.
higher Torah.
Right,
And so that's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
imply
right.
here, that's
Right,
the
if it really
Torah
comes
that
from-
we're being asked to be tuned into when we give with all of our heart.
okay,
You know, that
Right.
spirit of generosity.
nice, very nice. Okay, so what's the next one? The next one is Gemilos Chesed, is acts of kindness. And actually that kind of addresses what you were saying, that the kindness. But once we have the Torah, you see the very last of all these lists of mitzvot, what's the very last one say? Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. The study of Torah is the most basic of them all, because now, in our situation, we need the Torah's guidelines. So, the example I give to people, let's say, you want to show appreciation to somebody, so you want to bring them flowers, but the person who you're giving it to might be allergic to flowers. So you think you're doing something kind, and it is coming from the kindness of your heart, but you also have to know, like the context, you have to know the nature of the recipient, if they're going to really, appreciate and, be receptive to what you're doing. So that's how Gemilos Chesed involves not just the actions of the giver, but also the nature of the receiver, how they're going to be receptive to the gift that's being given. And you need the Torah to guide you along that. And how do you get to it? How do you learn Torah? So the next one actually says, Hashkamat Beit HaMidrash Shachrit Ba'arvit, getting up early to go to the house of study morning and evening. So what is the idea of getting up early add to it? Let's say there's a school where you don't have to get up so early. What's the point of getting up early? Jude?
Her mind is more attentive in the morning.
Okay.
Say it in terms of what?
Is more attentive.
Okay.
Well, some people say teenagers, they're groggy in the morning, and they stay up late at night, but you haven't even said that quite yet. So what else about getting up early? What does that show? Hint, in the parsha yesterday about Abraham, something
Reason.
about getting up early.
It's the reason he had zeal. He had
Right, so the Torah says when the hardest test of all for him, Vayash came Abraham Baboker, he woke up early in the morning. God didn't say get up early in the morning, he just said, take your son up to this mountain. But we, like with a modern perspective, might be like a little kind of upset about that, to say the least, because, okay, God is saying us to do something very, very difficult, but we have to get up early in the morning to do it. But that showed that Avram's faith was not, he knew that God was telling him something that couldn't be, it really couldn't take a life, because God had already promised Abraham, you're going to have a child who's going to be the father of the Jewish nation. And so what's going on in Abraham's mind? Well, God has to keep his promise, but he's telling me to do this, so God has to figure out a way to resolve this. And God did figure out a way. That's where the ram appeared. And I always tell this to people. I remember telling it to Rabbi Mark. He told it over, I think, one Rosh Hashanah sermon, that part of the idea of faith is that if you have a choice between two bad possibilities, step back, step up, have that faith that there's something that transcends those two opposites. And that faith is going to make you open, like the openness of the heart, to open God's shefa. God will provide what's called like a third solution. And that's what happened in the Akedah. The ram was the third solution that Avram would never have thought of. And I think the lesson for us is that sometimes, very often, we're stuck in two undesirable choices. And that's the time to step back and you know, let go and let God, basically. Okay, God guide me to a place that I couldn't get to on my own. One of my favorite psalms is Psalm 61, where it says, "Lead me to a boulder that's too high for me." A very appropriate quote for boulder. You know, lead me to a place that I can't see with my own eyes. Yeah. So this is the idea of going to a house of study, is to find out guidance as to. I heard a story once. A person who was told in his elder years that there's such a day as Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year for the Jewish people, and he thought to himself, but nobody gave him any instructions. He thought, how do I celebrate holidays? I go to the fanciest restaurant and I have the biggest meal that I can. So that's what he did. And so, you know, again, if we think of it from the Baal Shem Tov's eyes, and not just from the code of laws, on the one hand, he's eating food, probably not kosher, that he's not supposed to eat on Yom Kippur, but at the same time, he's using that as a way to serve God. So I'm sure that God will see his divlev, his kavana, his intention, rather than the external manifestation of his action. All right, welcoming guests. This is a very, very, very interesting one. Welcoming guests. So we also have this in the Parsha, where it says that Abraham planted a tamarisk tree. Remember that from reading it? Vayita Eshel. So the word Eshel, a special tree where he invited guests to sit under the tree, like Wayne has these nice trees in his backyard that people can sit under. But the word Eshel has 3 letters in it: Aleph, Shin, and Lamed. So the rabbis say Aleph, Shin, and Lamed stand for the 3 mitzvot that a host should do for their guests. So Aleph is achila, eating. Shin is shetiyah, drinking. And the last letter, Lamed, is levaya, which means accompanying the guests at least to the door, or even further, like 4 amos. And if you don't do, there's several stories were packed about people who their house got on fire, and they used to welcome guests, and they went to a rabbi and said, like, what happened? I used my house for holy purposes. So the rabbi said, you might have fed the guests, you might have given something to drink, but did you accompany them to the door? And if you don't do that, the Aleph and Shin spell Aish, which is fire. So remember to do the levaya, remember to do the accompanying. Because, and I read this beautiful commentary, why do you do this? This is like my favorite commentary, all these different aspects. So if you accompany somebody past where they need to go, you're showing them that you're not just giving them physical sustenance and just letting them go on their own. Your presence is going with them even when the food is no longer there. And when they feel accompanied, they feel like a person is accompanying me. Maybe God is also going with me, even when I feel alone. I just love that kind of connection with that idea. And I think, we skip a little bit, I think we connect it to Levayat Hamet, accompanying the dead. Very interesting. The very same word that's used for accompanying somebody outside the door is used for accompanying the dead. Now think about that. That's like a big Chevra Kadisha concept. That when somebody is with a person who died, you're not just keeping them company, like in a physical sense, you're expressing to the soul that they're not alone. The soul is not alone. There are people, there are loved ones, people who care that are going with not just the body, but with the soul too. And that's why I think, this is my teaching, that's why I think it's the same word, levaya, which is used for accompanying the guests to the door. Isn't that like?
It's the same thing with Shira. With you don't need to do Shira with the soldier who died, right, in Israel, when you were talking about.
Oh, burying them with me.
Right, it's that there is no journey. That
They're already.
They're already there.
Wow, very
And
beautiful.
It's the same thing. And in Japan, because another wisdom tradition, not only do they accompany to the person to the outside, but they won't turn their back until the other person can't be seen.
Wow,
Right? That you should never turn your back on somebody in this journey.
beautiful. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's something like that in Jewish tradition. I don't remember, but
Similar.
yeah, it's a similar idea. Yeah. Let's see what else. Oh, visiting the sick. So also interesting that you need the Torah to guide you there, because like there are specific laws that preferably more than one person should visit a sick person, because the idea is that the Talmud says if you visit a sick person, you take away 1/60 of their sickness. So, well, I wouldn't say that, 60 people have to go in all at once, because I think the person might, want to leave the world and they get a little scared when 60 people come in. But there are kind of, rules of guidelines. And again, it's all about the time that you should go in. You shouldn't go in too early in the morning. You shouldn't go in too late at night. In other words, the idea is take into consideration the feelings and the health, the state of the person that you're visiting. Don't just say, oh, okay, I visited them like when they were at their worst or at their best, which isn't necessarily so helpful. I have visited them exactly at the time that they needed, they could accept my visit in a way that wouldn't, distress them or upset them, or say, I don't need visitors, or I'm too sick for visitors. Of course, we can't always know, but take that into mind when you're visiting somebody, how they're feeling, and you need the Torah to help you, kind of discriminate into those kind of situations, and to what things you should talk about. Again, it's all about trying to put yourself in the place of the other person. That's really, I think, where the generosity comes in, the generosity of spirit, because we know that the basic commandment that covers all these, besides studying Torah, is the Ari Rabbi Isaac Luria says, it's in his Siddur. I think I know Rabbi Mark quotes it. Yeah, it is in here. Turn back one page to page 4. Before it even goes into the Torah blessings, and this comes from Rabbi Isaac Luria, the famous Kabbalist. I hereby accept the obligation of fulfilling my Creator's mitzvah in the Torah of love your neighbor as yourself. So this is so basic for many, many different reasons, but one of the main reasons why it's so basic is because, and this is what the rabbi who gave this class online talked about. He talked about the idea that when you help another person, when you do something for another person, you're not just doing it for the other person. You become part of the other person, and the other person becomes part of yourself. You're extending, you're not negating yourself, you're extending yourself, you're enlarging yourself to include the other people. So that, as yourself, means not just the regular meaning is that, what you wouldn't want to be done to yourself, don't do to somebody else, but it's also much, much broader than that. It's the idea of also, another paraphrase of this, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lazeh. All Israel are responsible for one another. And the word responsible, arevim, also comes from a word that means pleasant. All Israel should be pleasing to each other. And when that happens, that generosity of spirit, you're tuned into the other person, and you want to learn what makes them, what makes them happy, what makes them fulfilled. And the rabbi said something very interesting online. He said that, and I never thought of it until I actually heard him say it like this. Some people, they can't be so generous because they feel that making themselves vulnerable, or they're like giving up their power. So the rabbi said, you really gain your power when you're helping somebody else.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you feel helpless. What if, so many of us now, outside of Israel, we feel helpless. What are we doing for the people, who are suffering so? And part of the idea is, if we think about, we're all one collective soul, so what we do something, even the smallest thing for another person here is going to affect, like the butterfly effect, is going to affect putting out that spark of goodness in the world that light that will convey, that will have an impact on the darkness of people who are suffering. So that idea of reaching out to somebody else makes us even that much stronger. And another example that the rabbis give, the Kabbalists give, that it's like, why we say this before prayer, because our personal prayer is like a little rope, like a little strand of rope that starts off here in this world, and when we shake it, when we pray, the rope goes up to heaven, so to speak, affects God. But that's still one little strand. But when we make that commitment to be together with everybody else, we become that whole chevel, that whole rope that makes a much larger impact in heaven. And when God sees that, if God is the ultimate parent, what brings the parent the most joy? To see that the children are getting along with each other and are connected with each other. So that is one of the ideas, that this mitzvah of even just thinking about loving your friend as yourself. And this is why a lot of people, before they pray, they have either in shul or at home, they have a charity box, and they'll put a little coin in the charity box, because that's an action to take that will help you reach out to other people and give a physical expression of that feeling of love. And might be just a coin in quantity, but in quality, it makes such a big impact. That coin kind of continues to shake in the container of the world, so to speak. That can have an effect on the entire world. So let's go just finish up here the passage from the Talmud. So the very ending says, bringing peace, hava'at shalom bein adam lechavero, bringing peace between a person and his friend, bein ish leishto, and a person and his wife. And then it ends, the study of Torah is equal to them all. But just another, Wayne talked about Moses, and there's another comparison with Moses and Aaron. When Moses died, the Torah says the house of Israel mourned for him. But when Aaron died, it says Kol Yisrael, all of Israel. And why? So the rabbis asked the question, what was the difference between the two? So Moshe was the one who laid down the law, basically. And the law is not necessarily comfortable on all aspects to it. But what did Aaron do? If he saw two people arguing, fighting, he would go over to one person and say, oh, your friend really wants to make up with you, but he's kind of embarrassed. And he'd do the same thing with the other friend. And when they would see each other, they would just hug automatically because they felt that the other person felt love in their heart, and therefore, like a mirror, they expressed their love. So that's why everybody mourned for him, for Aaron. So, but the rabbis asked, wasn't that a lie? The Torah says, keep away from the lie. because these two people were fighting, or the husband and wife. So how do you deal with the fact that they were lying? So the rabbi says something very deep, that the essence of the soul really does feel love. It's only the outer trappings, the vicissitudes of life that cause trouble, conflict between families and friends. And if you peel off those outer trappings, and then that inner love can come out. So that's what Aaron was doing. He wasn't just telling them, your friend feels love for you. When he said that, and that's why the Torah says, be like the students of Aaron, love peace and pursue peace and bring the people to have a love of Torah. Well, and on one note, one kind of funny line, Talmud Torah keneged kulam, the study of Torah equals them all. So once I was teaching at Hebrew school, like after school teenagers, they were kind of, not so polite and kind of snarky. And I was teaching them this paragraph, and I asked them, why does it say Talmud Torah keneged kulam? The study of Torah is more important, more basic, more important than all of them. So one boy raised his hand and he said, well, I think it means the study of Torah leads to them all. So I was very upset until this day. But this year, right now, this week, and this a very, very deep thing that I want to say, the study of Torah leads to people spend a lot of their life acquiring tchotchkes, acquiring things, and things don't mean that much in the world to come, and not even in this world. But if you hear what's going on in Israel, a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, supposed to go his kid's bar and bat mitzvah, but it was pre-COVID. So just a few days ago, he posted on Facebook, look what I'm doing. I'm making beef jerky for the soldiers. So if you think about all these things that people are doing, they're buying toiletries and stuff that, is the most physical thing in the world. But what are they doing with those physical things? They're using them to help people who are in need. And those physical things are no longer physical. They're sparks of godliness that are going back to their source. So just think about that. And so the idea of Torah, the study of Torah leading to them all, is not such a snarky thing. It's, if you can acquire things that you can then use for your own soul and especially for other people's lives, then your life is not a wasted life. Your life becomes holy from morning to night. Thank you.
Should we take